The leaders of the US, Egypt and Qatar have demanded the resumption of talks to stop the fighting in Gaza. They issued a joint statement saying only the details of carrying out any ceasefire and hostage release need to be worked out. Israel has said it would send negotiators to Doha or Cairo on August 15th. Hamas has yet to respond. The recent assassination of Hamas political leader in Tehran, widely blamed on Israel, has raised tensions across the region, some saying it's complicated peace efforts. And let's bring in Rebecca Ritters in Jerusalem. We both know how complicated this has been from the start, Rebecca, but what is the likelihood in your opinion of these talks actually taking part, first of all, taking place?
Well, I think they will, they with all likelihood will take place, Ben. I mean, you just said yourself, though, this region is very complicated. You yourself have reported from here, and everyone knows that these talks are supposed to take place on Thursday. A week in this region is a lifetime, and anything could happen. Of course, we're waiting for retaliatory responses from both Hezbollah and Iran. Should that happen, then, you know, it's very likely that the talks will either be put on hold or certainly delayed. But otherwise, given the joint statement released yesterday, and then, of course, the Prime Minister's office here issuing a statement saying that Israel will take part in the talks, does mean that they are likely to go ahead on Thursday at a yet-to-be-determined location. This, of course, is the latest iteration of a deal. It's based on the framework set out by US President Joe Biden at the end of May. And, you know, both sides, Hamas and Israel, have been close to agreeing on this deal, but there are still sticking points, both sides blaming each other for those sticking points. So we'll just have to see what comes out of these latest round of negotiations next week. OK, so run us through those sticking points again. Yeah, most of the same issues keep coming up. We have been talking about this now for months, and at various times throughout all of these discussions, these various iterations of various deals, we have been talking about the same sticking points, namely the discussion or the talking point around the complete cessation of hostilities. That's something that Hamas has been demanding, and it's something that Israel is saying is absolutely off the table. It wants to have the ability to resume fighting after a period, perhaps after the first phase of the hostage negotiations is complete and some of the hostages have been released. Particularly a sticking point being reported in this is something around Article 14, which of course I don't expect people to be familiar with, but the language is around the duration of negotiations that Hamas and Israel are supposed to start during that first phase of negotiations. Now, the original language as it stands now is that the US, Qatar and Egypt, those key negotiating partners, will make every effort to ensure that these negotiations end in an agreement for a permanent ceasefire. Now, Hamas want that language to be changed from make every effort to ensure, to try and firm up that agreement. But we've been hearing from the Israeli side that that's something they're unlikely to agree to. So, of course, while we talk about ironing out the finer details, these finer details are indeed very important and still mean that both sides are pretty far apart.
And Rebecca, what kind of pressure is the hostage situation putting on Netanyahu to come to any agreement?
Well, just after the joint statement was issued, Ben, we heard from the Hostage Families Forum. It's a representative body for the families of the hostages. They said the government and the Prime Minister must demonstrate leadership and conclude a deal without further delay. They have been ramping up the pressure, I could say, on the government and on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We've been seeing weekly protests, even more than weekly at times. We've been seeing, you know, them calling in the media that they want this to be the most important thing that the government is pursuing, of course, is the release of the hostages. Well, of course, Netanyahu is also pursuing his military aims, which he says is equally important, and that's completely dismantling Hamas. You know, for the families of the hostages, it must just be an agonising, I think frustrating isn't strong enough, definitely an agonising wait as they get hope every time that, you know, the US and other people say that we're close to a deal. And then, of course, those hopes are dashed when the deal fails. They have been putting on pressure, though, I should say, for, you know, the entire time, and it still hasn't been enough. So whether or not, you know, they can ramp up the pressure and affect, you know, a different response from Israel this time remains to be seen. But, you know, we haven't seen that in the last 9 or so months since the last hostage deal. We haven't seen another deal. So, you know, the pressure is not being ignored by the government, but certainly not getting it over the line when it comes to agreeing to this deal.
Yeah, definitely. 10 months of agony for the families of hostages in Israel and 10 months of agony for the people of Gaza too. Rebecca, thank you very much for bringing us up to date
Absolutely.
and running through the prospects. Gershon Baskin is an Israeli peace activist. He operated a negotiating channel with Hamas for the release of the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit, whom Hamas held hostage for over 5 years. I asked him what message mediators are trying to send with this new round of talks.
Well, first of all, I would caution, speaking about a peace agreement, we're not talking about peace. We're talking about a ceasefire, an end to the war, the release of Israeli hostages, the release of Palestinian prisoners. It's a far call from peace, so let's focus on that needs to be done. What has happened with the recent joint announcement by the United States, Qatar, and Egypt, seems to be some kind of changing of the rules that they've been playing by for the last 10 months. It seems that the mediators have come to the conclusion that they shouldn't carry out these negotiations unended, that they have said that they are calling for the parties to show up on the 15th of August. They are prepared to put bridging proposals on the table, which is really the first time we've heard this. And it seems to me that they are strong-arming both Israel and Hamas into getting to the talks and hopefully reaching an agreement that will put an end to this war and release the 115 Israeli hostages who are still in Gaza.
In hindsight, what do you think now of the Gilad Shalit exchange in which Hamas's Yahya Sinwar was released? He's said to have planned the October 7 attacks on Israel.
Right, I don't think it's really relevant to the discussion, but we have to remember that Gilad Shalit was in captivity for 5 years and 4 months. The Israeli held in enemy captivity for longer than any other Israeli. The deal that was on the table had actually been on the table 6 months after his abduction from an army base inside of Israel. It took 5 years until the parties reached an agreement on that deal. It was not a good deal, but it was the only deal to bring the Israeli soldier home, which is part of the Israeli ethos, or what has been the Israeli ethos, that we don't leave anyone behind, and we're willing to pay a high price for our people to be returned, civilians and military people. The problem is not the deal itself. The problem is that since he was released in 2011, nothing was done to put an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is our tragedy. There is no military solution to this conflict. There never has been one. There is no military solution for dealing with Hamas. There never has been one. What we need is a political solution which requires negotiations. It requires us to make Palestine real for the Palestinian people, for us to turn the two-state solution into a reality. It will require Germany, for example, to recognize the state of Palestine and to call on other nations to recognize both Israel and Palestine.
The reason I ask you about that deal, which you say wasn't good, is there anything that makes you think this current deal is going to be any better?
No, it won't be better. But 115 Israelis are captive in Gaza for 10 months. A majority of them are believed to no longer be alive. This goes completely against the Israeli ethos. They were abandoned by the country. They were not defended. They were taken from their homes and military bases, from their beds, in pajamas, and held in captivity by the state of Israel, which failed to protect its border and failed to protect its citizens. And the government of Israel has a moral responsibility to bring them home. No one should be left in Gaza. This has to end. There is a price for ending that, for bringing them home. It also has to end because tens of thousands of people have been killed in Gaza, most of them non-combatants. 2 million people there are homeless. Their homes have been destroyed. Too much damage has been done. This has to end.
We're talking about some 40,000 deaths, according to the Hamas-led health authorities in Gaza. But we've also seen so many hostage deaths, as you point out. How much negotiating power, then, does Hamas actually have right now?
Hamas can negotiate forever until all the hostages are dead, and then even Israel will negotiate for the return of their bodies. But we don't want that to happen. Hamas is not going to surrender. Israel would like to find the Hamas leadership and kill them, but there's no guarantee that once they do that, if they do that, the hostages will remain alive. If we want to get these people home, we're talking about still some children, women, elderly people, sick and wounded people, they have to be brought home. there is no way to bring them home without a negotiated agreement. Israel has been trying to find them and rescue them for 10 months, and in those 10 months, we've only rescued a handful of them.
Well, let's hope we can see a ceasefire soon and maybe even peace at some stage, as you underlined earlier. Israeli peace activist and negotiator Gershon Baskin, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And as the families of Israeli hostages wait for their loved ones to be freed, the people of Gaza are also desperate for the fighting to stop. The Hamas-run health ministry saying almost 40,000 people have been killed, as I mentioned.
10 months into Israel's war with Hamas, thousands of Gazans are again forced to flee. Many have moved multiple times to escape the fighting. Now they're leaving Khan Yunis as Israel steps up its attacks once again.
There's no safe area. I'm telling you, we cannot find a place to stay. We're thrown in the streets. I'm calling on them to see us because we are tired. By God, we are tired. By God, we are tired.
It's not just Israel's attacks that shatter any sense of security. A lack of food, clean water and basic supplies means it's a daily struggle to survive.
We are tired of this life. By God, death is better than this. Let the country see our situation and find a solution. We are tired. We've died 100 times.
Israeli attacks have hit 2 schools in Gaza City in recent days. Gaza's Civil Defence Agency said more than 18 people were killed. The Israeli military said it struck Hamas command centres.